Hello and welcome to Raising Those Spirits.
If he moved fast enough, perhaps he would share a meal with Hester, he thought.
We are doing something a little different again. So last week we kind of story broke one of our new cryptids. We created something called the Zingwin, and then we set about pitching an idea for how that story would go if we were to kind of create a mythology around the Zingwin. So this week, we are actually going to do a live reading of the short story that we were able to put together with all of our notes and decisions from last week's podcast. So it'll be a short one, kind of like a Dad's Digress, but mainly it'll just be Sam reading you our final draft of Beware the Zingwin, a Raising Those Spirits campfire story.
During the 1750s, in the colony of Massachusetts, an area that is known today as Fall River, the handsome young Philemon Thatcher. 17 years old, and ready to set out on his own, Philemon had his intentions for marriage set on Hester Mercy, daughter of the well-regarded local merchant Oliver Mercy. Late one winter, the Mercy family found themselves in dire straits, as their stores of jams and preserved foods had been pilfered. Young Philemon found this an opportunity to win favor with his would-be bride and potential father-in-law. The Thatcher family, owners of vast cranberry bogs, were well stocked with preserved food. Philemon was to set out for town on his horse, with a wealth of jam jars from the Thatcher pantry to present the Mercies. Rumors had spread wildly about just who had made off with the Mercy's stock of food, as their home was well protected against both animals and thieves. Some of the older, perhaps more superstitious members of the community claimed that it was the work of a Zingwin, beast described as having the skin of a reptile, a long pointed snout filled with sharp teeth, and long, writhing, slithering limbs. Stories went that as other animals slept for the winter, the Zingwins stalked the New England forest. They preyed on hibernating animals, fish stuck in frozen lakes and rivers, and with humans having entered their territory, the preserved foods they kept for the winter. There wasn't a root cellar or storehouse that could hold off a Zingwin determined enough to enter it. They would feast until they had their fill, and whatever preserved foods remained after would be found rotten, spoiled and soured by the unnatural presence of the Zingwin. Philemon's grandfather warned him not to travel into town at night with a Zingwin in the woods, but Philemon was neither old or superstitious, and was not concerned about tales of monsters. Although it was getting late, if he was to impress Hester Mercy, Philemon had to be on his way. His horse was saddled just as the sun began its journey low into the sky. He set onto the road through the forest. If he moved fast enough, perhaps he would share a meal with Hester, he thought, and while there, engage her father with his wit and many insights into how to improve the Mercy family business. His grandfather made one final effort to dissuade him, so to placate his elder, he took extra musket balls and a large knife with him. Not that a privileged young man like Philmon would know what to do with a knife if it came to that. The sun sets quickly during a New England winter, and as it grew dark and the road more icy and treacherous, Philmon was forced to move slower than he had hoped. With miles still ahead and the pace slowed to a crawl, he was forced to make camp and wait to finish his ride in the morning. As he settled by the fire, he couldn't help but notice his horse was acting strange. The normally calm gelding was pacing, whinnying, and snorting. Elmon arose to calm the horse, and as he stood he heard a great crack, as if something large had stepped on a dry branch. Philmon froze in fright. Within the forest, just out of sight, he heard movement, and what he imagined to be claws scraping against tree bark, and then a howling scream, which did not match any wolf or beast he had ever heard. Solomon reminded himself that he did not believe in monsters in the woods, and that anything that might threaten him would be deep into a winter sleep. Then, he saw the glint of something in the dark. Two eyes, perhaps? No. Teeth. Rows of sharp teeth and a long reptilian snout, just visible, illuminated in the light of the campfire. The Zingwin snorted and howled again. Someone now believed there were monsters in the woods. Not soon enough, however, as his horse needed much less convincing and was already galloping away from the camp, along with the gun and the knife he had packed to defend himself. All Philemon had was a bag of jam jars he had taken off the horse before it ran off. The stories he had heard, the Zingwin was not a people eater necessarily. He was hunting for preserved foods. He reached into his bag and held up one of the jars. A long tongue emerged from the Zingwin's mouth and licked its lips approvingly. He tossed the jar to the monster and then turned towards the road and started to run. Over his footsteps, he could hear the Zingwin's claws struggle to open the lid of the jar before smashing it onto a rock, gobbling up its contents. After a few precious minutes, it finished its meal and set off after Philemon, following the sound of glass jars clacking together as he ran. Through the night, Philemon ran, and each time as the Zingwin would begin to catch up to him, he would throw another jar into the woods to buy time. Jar by jar, the delicious food intended for Hester Mercy and her father depleted. In the morning, a group of travelers heading through the woods happened upon Philemon's lost horse and followed its trail back along the road. Not far out of town, they found Philemon, half frozen and delirious, mumbling about a monster and asking for help to get to the Mercy homestead. They took him there, shaken and filthy from a night in the icy woods. After arriving, Philemon recounted his ordeal, and upon finishing his tale, reached into his bag and handed Hester the last remaining jar of his family's preserved cranberries. Hester politely thanked him, asking her older brother to help Philemon back onto his horse and off to the Thatcher farm. Later that morning, when she opened the jar for her family's breakfast, she found that it was rotten, spoiled, and sour. Philemon Thatcher did not see much of Hester Mercy or her father after that day. He never again traveled through the forest on cold winter nights.
Let us know what you think. Leave a like and a comment. You know, we'll take any creative input. We appreciate it, and we appreciate you listening. So,
Thanks for listening, everybody.
I'm Steve,
I'm Sam.
and we'll see you next week where we create a whole new abomination.
Ooh, so spooky.
Bye.
Hey,